Hello, hi everyone. Hi, welcome back to Get Your Play Online. My name is Jalen, and for today's science and sensory activity, I'm going to be doing a little experiment with you guys. We're going to see what sinks in water and what floats. We're going to be using a few household items and toys to see, and even a flower, to see what floats in the water and what sinks. It's very fun, very interesting, and I hope you enjoy it, okay? So I'm going to move this down here now that I said hello so that you can see everything. So first, before we get started, I just want to let you know that we will be using a big container of water. So when you do this activity, you want to be on a counter like this or have maybe a water resistant tablecloth or plastic bag or something. Or you could even do this outside so that you don't really have to worry about space. But if you're not doing it outside, then it is okay to place something down so that cleaning up will be easier. Okay, so now I will tell you what you will need in order to do this experiment. You'll need a big container like this. Something that's clear is better because you'll be able to see everything. So if you don't have a container that's clear, that's okay too. You can just look down into the water. I have already filled it almost to the top with water for the sake of this video, this live video. But if you haven't filled yours up yet, then you can do that later. As far as what we're going to be putting in the water, I wanted to have some colorful water, so I'm going to be using red and blue food coloring here, and I'm going to mix these together. Do you know what happens when you mix red and blue together? You get purple, right? So I'm gonna try to make like a slightly purplish pink water with these two food coloring, just to make it a little fun and interesting. I have a toothpick because I don't want to put too much food coloring in the water, so I'm going to use this with some of the food coloring. And to mix the water so that all the food coloring goes in together and makes a nice color, I have this spoon here. Now for what we're going to be observing sinking or floating in water, I have a few things. First I have this very pretty pink flower. We're going to see if this sinks or floats. And a crayon, a colored pencil. I have this bottle cap from a glass bottle. I think it was root beer. You can also use a cork that you would find in some glass bottles. So either a bottle cap or a cork. I have a foam ball here. And you can use like any foam shape or foam, anything, something that's made of foam. I have a rubber ball. This is not as squishy. A marble. This is a very big marble, so you can use a small marble, a medium marble, or a large marble like I have here. I have this cool eraser. Do you know what animal this is? It's a seahorse. So it's supposed to be in the water. I thought that was cool. So an eraser. A coin, you can use a nickel, a dime, or you could be like me and use a penny. And I have some pebbles, some stones from my garden in my backyard. You can also use a rock that you found outside or any type of stone or rock or pebble. Okay, so before we start coloring our water, I wanted to ask you guys, let's make some educated guesses about what will sink and what will float, okay? So first, for the foam ball, it's very light and squishy. You see, it it gives way. It can be pressed into very easily because it's so soft. Do you think an item like this would float or sink in water? Very soft and light, very light and soft and squishy. Do you think it would float or sink? And if you want to write down your guesses to see if you were right or not, that's cool too. You can do that. So the foam ball, got your guess? Okay. Next for the rubber ball, this one is much different because as you can see, it's harder to press into. It's not as soft as the foam ball and it's heavier. It's a lot heavier than the foam ball. So do you think this will sink or float in water? What do you think? Got your guess? Okay. Next item, colored pencil. We know colored pencils are pretty light. We hold them to write all the time. It's pretty light, but it's unlike the other two items that I just showed you. You can't press into it. It's not squishy at all. Do you think this will sink or float? Okay. For the crayon, it's a little bit, it kind of feels a little heavier than the colored pencil. But again, it's not soft or squishy, it's very hard. But it is light. I would still say that it is light. So do you think this will float or do you think it will sink in the water? Crayon. Got your answer? Okay, we'll see in just a moment. For the marble, this is very solid, very hard. You can't squish it at all. So it's a similar shape to the foam ball and the rubber ball. But as far as how it feels, it's much harder, it's sterner. So do you think this will sink or float in water? Okay, marble, sink or float? Uh-oh. And next for the flower, very pretty flower. Flowers are very soft. They have these beautiful petals and they're pretty squishy too. I don't want to squish it too much because I don't want to mess it up, but you see, they're pretty squishy as well. So what do you think? Do you think this will sink or float in water? Make your best guess. Okay? What about our little seahorse? Seahorse eraser. So you can use whatever eraser you have. I just have one that's shaped like a seahorse. But do you think an eraser will sink or float? It's a little squishy, not really. It's just a little bit squishy and soft. And it's not heavy, but it is hard. Do you think it will sink or float in water? Got your guess? Okay. Next is our bottle cap. Bottle cap. Pretty light, not squishy or soft. It's very sturdy. Do you think this will sink or float? Sink or float? Okay. How about for your coin, whether it is a penny like this one, or a nickel, or a dime, or a quarter, whatever it is, what do you think? Do you think it will sink? Or do you think it will float in water? Got your answer? Okay. And lastly, for our rocks or pebbles, I will pull them out of one or two out of the bag so you can see. The rock, pebble, is hard, it's not squishy, it's pretty small, and it's not necessarily heavy, but it is very solid. It's not soft or squishy at all. Do you think it will sink or do you think it will float in water? Got your answers? Okay, awesome. So now that we have made our educated guesses based on what we know about our items, let's start the experiment and see where you were right and where you were maybe mistaken. And we'll learn something new today. First, just to make the activity a little cool, I'm going to color the water. I want to make purple. You can make whatever color water you want. I'm going to make a purplish pink. And so to do that, I'm going to add 1 drop of red and just a little bit of blue, because as you can see, this blue is really, really dark, right? So it might take over the color of the water if I put an entire drop. I'll start with red. And then I will use my toothpick here and just kind of dip it into the blue food coloring, like this. So that I have a little on the end of the toothpick, and I will swirl it in the water like this. Now I will mix it together. And be careful. Also, of course, if you're still filling up your container with water, that's fine. Take your time. I'm going to be coloring the water. So it's looking very pink right now. I'm going to add just a little bit more blue, the same way. And stir, stir, stir. Keep adding your food coloring until you've got the color or shade that you want. What color are you guys making your water? I think green water would be cool, or even trying other ways to mix, like mixing green and blue and seeing if you can make like a turquoise type color, or yellow water, something that's a bit see-through so that you can see everything but still very pretty and interesting. So what color would you like to make your water? You can make it any color you want. And it's really fun to mix colors. I love doing that because you get to see what color combinations make different colors. It's very, very interesting. Okay, so now I have my purplish pink here. I'll put the food coloring to the side. Put the spoon to the side. So you can see it's like a very see-through purplish pink color. It's so pretty. Okay, are you done coloring your water and filling your container? Of course, you don't have to color your water. This is optional, but it's very fun. So if you want to, go ahead. Okay? So now that your water has been decorated, we've colored our water, we can start testing each of our items to see what sinks and what floats. Okay? So I will start with this foam ball. Remember, it's very squishy and soft and light. It's easy to throw and toss in your hand. So what do you think? Do you think the foam ball is going to sink or float? What was your guess? Okay, well now is the moment of truth. We're going to see, does it sink or does it float? Ready? Just place it in the water. Whoa, what is it doing? It's floating, right? It's not going down deep into the water at all. So the foam ball is floating. And it's floating all around the water. Okay? Next, let's try the rubber ball. Okay, remember it's a little similar to the foam ball. It's not as squishy, it's a bit harder. Similar shape. You can't throw it as easily as the foam ball, so it's not as light. Did you think this was going to sink, or did you think it was going to float? Let's test it out and see if it sinks or floats. Place it into the water. Oh, and it went all the way to the bottom. So that means it sinks. It sinks in the water. So it's, even though it looks very similar, it looks the same as the foam ball, it is not the same because it went all the way to the bottom of the container. Next, let's put our little seahorse eraser in the water. Okay, so the eraser, remember it's a little soft, but it's harder than it is soft. And it's light, but very solid. What do you think? Did you think it was going to sink or float? Let's test it out and see. In the water, and whoop, it went down to the bottom. So that means it sinks. It's right there next to the rubber ball. So the eraser sinks as well. Depending on what kind of eraser you have, yours could possibly float too. Next, for the crayon, it's light, but it's very hard and solid. So do you think this will sink, or do you think it will float? Do you remember? Okay, let's test it out and see. Will it sink or will it float? And it slowly sank to the bottom. So it slowly went down, and now it's right next to the eraser. So the crayon sinks just like the eraser and the rubber ball. Okay, let's put in our pretty flower and see, will it sink or will it float? Remember, the flower is soft, it's pretty light and squishy. So what do you think? Ready to test it out? Let's place it down in the water and see. Oh, looks like the flower is floating. You can see it's floating right there. It's floating right there next to the foam ball. So the flower is floating as well, not like the other ones that we did that are sitting at the bottom of the container. Next, let's try our coin, the penny. Do you think it will float or sink? So of course the penny is not squishy, it's very hard, but it is light. So what do you think? Let's test it out and see. Oh, it went straight to the bottom. So we see that the coin has also sank to the bottom. So it sinks instead of floats. Next, let's try our colored pencil. Okay, so the colored pencil is hard and solid, but it's pretty light. Now we know that the crayon sank to the bottom. Do you think the colored pencil is going to be the same, or do you think it might be a little different? Let's see if it sinks or floats. And it is floating here. So the colored pencil, there we go, is floating right next to the foam ball. So even though the crayon sank to the bottom, the colored pencil must be different somehow, right? Because it's floating in the water. Very cool. Next, let's try our marble. Okay, so the marble is hard. It's shaped like the foam ball and the rubber ball, but it's way harder than both of them. You can't press and squeeze it at all. It's a little heavy. You can't really toss it super easily in your hand. Do you think it's going to sink or float? Let's test it out and see. Oh, and it went straight to the bottom. So it sinks along with the other things that are at the bottom, like the rubber ball and the coin. It's all the way at the bottom. Okay, we have two more things to test out. Our pebbles and our bottle cap. I'll do the bottle cap first. You can also use a cork. So it's pretty light, but it is very solid, so it's not squishy. Do you think it will sink or float? Let's test it out and see. I'm just going to drop it in the water. And it went straight to the bottom. It's right there next to the marble and the crayon. And lastly, I'm going to put a few pebbles into the water to see if it sinks or floats. You can use any rocks that you find or that you have. I just had these little pebbles, so I'm going to use those. So I just have a handful of the rocks. And now I'm going to drop them in the water and see, will they float to the top or will they stay at the bottom? Okay, so our pebbles also fell all the way to the bottom and are right there next to the bottle cap and the crayon. So it looks like a lot of things fell to the bottom and sank, but a few things floated as well. Our foam ball is floating here, and so is the flower. The flower's right here floating, and the colored pencil is floating as well. Everything else, the rubber ball, the marble, our seahorse eraser, crayon, the coin, our bottle cap, and our pebbles all sank to the bottom, and they're staying at the bottom of the container. So do you know why these things are at the bottom, well, some of them sank to the bottom and one of them stayed floating at the top of the water. There's this thing called buoyancy, buoyancy, and that is basically talking about how things float in or sink in water. And what determines what makes something float or sink in water is how heavy it is. So if something is heavier than water or has a greater density than water, then it will sink down to the bottom. So, for example, our marble is heavier than water, so water can't hold it up. So it sinks down to the bottom. It has a greater density than the water itself. On the other hand, things that float are lighter than water, and water can easily hold it up. So water can easily hold those things up because it is lighter, and that makes them float in the water. And that would be a lighter density than water. Okay, so the things that float have a lighter density than water, and the things that sink have a heavier or greater density than water. So it's floating and sinking again. So these are all of our materials in the water. Some of them floated and some of them sank. So that is it for today's science and sensory activity. I hope you guys learned something new and you had a good time coloring your water and then testing out your guesses to see what floats and what sinks. Were you right? Were you wrong? It's okay either way because you got to learn something new. I hope you guys had a great time. We're always happy to see you here on Get Your Play Online. Thank you. Bye bye.